recording.
Excellent. All right, T-session number 10, dealing with drives. We're going to get into the various types of drives, their purposes, characteristics, and different types of storage devices you may come across and or use in an enterprise environment and or personal use. Compare and contrast them with various connection interfaces for the drives, their characteristics and purposes, and explain the purpose and types of RAID arrays, and describe the purpose for installing storage devices, or the process for installing storage devices, and then identify common hard drive problems and describe how to solve them. All right. Similar to the ones we had yesterday, customer focus. When you are dealing with hard drives, you are dealing with some of the most precious commodities that customers have, their data. And depending on the person, it could be extremely valuable, and they can be very emotionally distraught if they're unable to access that data. So you want to have good customer focus skills, be able to try to assure them that you're going to do everything you possibly can to make sure their data is safe, and then they can now access that data, if at all possible. And then even if you're unable to attain it, they are aware that you did absolutely everything that you could possibly do to try to recover it. All right, what are drives? They're basically storage devices used to record, hold, and or process information. And a device that only holds that is considered a recording medium. And devices that process it are storage equipment. Most common drives at the time of this writing of this exam were typically optical and hard drives. This is to be separate than memory, which is RAM. Although they do store information, it's only for a brief moment because they're holding onto that information so that it can be processed, and then they're refreshing it or wiping it clean. Typically, for these types of drives, for storage, you're wanting to hold onto that information for long periods of time. We break it down into essentially 5 basic types of drives that you will come across. First, you have your optical drives, which encompasses your CDs, Blu-rays, DVDs, and the various types of those. You would have your hard disk drives, which is the mechanical hard drives. And you will need to know the various parts within those drives and what they're used for. And then the more modern iteration, we have solid state drives, where there's actually no moving parts. The chips are more sophisticated, and they do pretty good for long-term storage, although these drives will degrade over time. Then you have hybrid drives, which is kind of a halfway point between the hard disk and the solid state. It typically will have both married into one drive and will separate the data out based on data that needs a fast read time versus long-term storage that you're not going to access as often. And then you have one of the oldest types, which are tape drives, which if you've watched movies from the 80s, you typically would see these. It looks like the old tapes that you would see for, pre-cassette tapes. And these are actually still used today because they serve really well for long-term storage. They're not the fastest for read and write, but the data integrity seems to hold up really well over long term. Let's see here. So all right, optical drives. Basically, we run into a few different types, and unfortunately, you do need to know a lot of this information. So you have compact disc, which is one of the first iterations of an optical drive, they had a max capacity of around 700 megabytes. You don't necessarily need to know the data rate of the 150 kilobytes per second. It's mostly storage capacity that they're going to be interested in. So around 700 megabytes on a compact disk. And that's the first level of optical drives. Then we moved up to DVDs, and then you have the R and RW. Can anybody tell me what that stands for?
Read and write and rewritable.
Correct. Well, automatically it's a read. And then you have read and rewrite. Yeah. Rewritable. And then you have 4 different types of DVDs. So you have the single side, single layer, which is essentially, let me get the annotator out here. So you got the CD or DVD, excuse me. Call this side A. DVD. Side B. So it's the same disk here. Now, when you have single side, single layer, it can only write to side A. That's it. Side B is the back of the DVD, and nothing can be written there. Now, they improved the technology a little bit, and they use different color lasers. So now they can actually use 2 different layers on side A. So they could write over the entire side of A 2 different times using different color layers going for different depths on the actual DVD, which allows you to essentially double the storage capacity on that particular disk. So when we go from a single side, single layer to a single side, double layer, you're essentially doubling your capacity from here to here. And then you have dual side, single layer, which is you could write 1 time on side A, 1 time on side B. That essentially also is doubling your capacity on the drive. So the capacities are essentially comparable, pretty close to it. Now, when it got really good, you had double side, double layer. So each side of the drive, each side of the disk could be written to 2 times, essentially giving you 4 times the capacity you would have had originally on a single side, single layer DVD-ROM. Any questions so far with DVDs? Basically, the way I did it is I remembered the lower end and the high end, and then realized that each time that technology stepped up, it essentially doubled. That was my trick for just remembering the storage capacities. I knew CD capped out at 700 megabytes. DVD started up at 4.7 gigs and ended just over 17 gigs. And then each time we stepped up the technology, it increased. Then we got to Blu-ray, and they did basically the same thing. So you had single side, single layer, only writing on one side 1 time, 25 gigabytes, which was a massive increase in the amount of data that can be stored on a particular optical drive. Then they moved up to single side, single or double layer, doubling it to 50, and then double side, double layer, doubling it yet again to 100. So just try to keep these separated out. Obviously, as the technology increases, DVDs are better than CDs, Blu-rays are better than DVDs. And then remembering your data breakdowns, 700 megabytes for CD, 4.7 to 17.1 gigabytes for DVD, 25 to 100 for Blu-ray. Any questions so far?
Better in thoughts of storage, but if you only had something to save that was pretty small, there's no need for you to work your way up to that Blu-ray if it doesn't require it. So of course, always consider that when you buy those things. So
Absolutely. And obviously, as the technology improves, it gets more expensive too. CDs significantly cheaper than DVDs.
very much so.
Blu-rays more expensive than DVDs, and now we're moving up into 4K, HDs, and those are even more expensive than actual Blu-rays. So that technology is continuing to improve as we go, and the price tag goes up with that. All right, mechanical hard drives and their anatomy. Essentially, when the data is stored onto a hard drive, it is put down sequentially in tracks. And if you look down here, get my annotator out again. Each individual circle on here essentially is a track, kind of like on old vinyls or LPs. It's a similar premise that each track is sequentially numbered. And then within each track, you will have a sector, which is one chunk of that track. So sector, and then the track goes all the way around. Now, the spindle is the center position of the actual drive itself. It's what it spins on. It's essentially the central axis for the drive. The disc that looks similar to like an LP or a CD or something like that, that is called the platter. It's almost like a plate or a platter. And then the actual mechanism that writes to and reads from the platter itself is called the head. And the head is attached to an actuator arm that moves back and forth as the disc is spinning, allowing the drive to either read the information that is written on it or write to the drive information that needs to be stored. And the pivot point for that actuator arm is the axis, the actuator axis. And the motor that drives it, that axis to move back and forth, is called the actuator. Then on the side of the drives, you will see a power connector.
I want to know if anybody know what type of power connector that is, looking at it. 4 pins.
That is Molex.
Thank you, Mogus.
What'd you say?
He said Molex.
Molex 4-pin. Then over here is an IDE connector, which we did see on the motherboard, which is a connector you would use for older hard drives, though you will still come across them today. So I do recommend learning all these parts of the drive. I'm not going to say it's going to be on the exam, but it's highly likely. Do what?
Go, Steve.
Today, these would normally be SATA, though, right? SATA powered.
For sure.
Yes.
But that's not guaranteed, because I still have a couple that I still kind of have some stuff stored on. But when you see all those pins, that's, but typically now, if you're buying one new,
ribbon, it's either IDE or PATA.
Yeah. If you're buying one new, you're going to typically see SATA. You're right, Steve.
But these drives are still in use. They still function, because they do have if well maintained, have a pretty good longevity. They're not jostled around a lot. So I definitely recommend becoming familiar with all the parts within the mechanical drive. We just kind of went over it, so we can do a little call out here and see what we got here. All right, Marvin, you want to call out somebody for A?
Amber, A for Amber.
So
I
right
think I
here,
see right.
right
Not
here.
the top of it, right?
What?
It's not the larger circle up top, right?
It's in between, actually.
It's
The-
with this piece right here.
The actuator arm.
Excellent.
Good job. Frankie. B, sir.
That would be the spindle.
Nice. Miss Jackie. C, ma'am.
See, I don't know.
This
What
thing
do you-
right here.
What do you
Sorry.
serve your food on?
A platter.
There you go.
That's also what you hold information on. You get that connection?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
No problem. Ashton D, sir.
Is that the actuator?
It
Yes.
is. It is. Good job. Let's see here. Chris, you ready? E, sir.
This thing right here.
My bad. Is that the axis?
It
The
is.
actual
it is.
axis?
There you go. That's more precise. I appreciate that. Good job, actuator axis. And last but not least, Avery, if you can give me F, sir. Okay, that is the head. Appreciate it.
All right.
That was good. Keep
Yeah.
those in because those will be used. Those will be called out. So
There is one more piece that I will add that I see come up, which is this little piece right here,
oh, that ribbon. Okay.
right there. The data ribbon. Data ribbon, essentially. That is another piece that you will see come up. For some reason, they did not notate it here.
They didn't
But-
notate it with a box, but if you notice, Kelly, there is a red line coming from it going up. So I think it was
Yeah.
designed to be addressed,
Originally
but not.
there.
Yeah.
I got you. Yeah, it makes sense.
Does it just hold data?
Well, the data ribbon is how the data is transmitted from the
Okay.
actual head to go to the port where the IDE or SATA or PATA cables are to go to the computer. That's the
Okay.
transmission medium to get out of the drive. All right, very good. Different parts of the hard drive. Rotation speeds on the drive. Main thing you want to take away. Faster it moves, the faster the drive is reading and writing. That is the main takeaway from the rotation speed and size. Now, typically for the other thing, just for in the wild, essentially, disk drive space, or size, actual physical size. For a laptop, your typical drive size, the physical size is 2.5 inches. So that's going to be your typical drive, size. Desktop, 3.5. They never really ask about low-end laptops, but 1.8.
Right.
You think you could put a desktop hard drive in a laptop, physically in it, not rigging it on the exterior?
I mean,
No, you
like,
can't.
No.
Space, though.
Now, can you put a laptop drive into a desktop?
I have
Okay. How are you able to do that? What
the
did you need?
same connections.
It's the same connections, but the bay, it'll rattle around in that bay. So what do you want to do?
You can fasten it down some type of ways. Just the desktop does not move, essentially. So it's really, I just kind of jimmy-rigged it a little bit, just
Okay.
kind of hold it.
Okay, let's ask Emmanuel that one. Do desktops move sometimes, Emmanuel? So they actually make adapters so that you can put a 2.5 drive into a little, essentially an adapter, and then that will slide into a 3.5 bay. So there actually is an adapter. They're really inexpensive. And typically that's the method you're going to want to use. And a lot of times when you're dealing with solid state drives nowadays, they only make the 2.5s, and you have to have that adapter to be able to insert it into a desktop physically. If you're never, ever going to move your desktop, I guess you could just place it in there, but all it's going to take essentially is somebody kicking that sucker over or bumping it over while that drive's running, and the actuator, the read-write head will skip and touch down on that hard drive and damage some of your data. Now, you might get lucky and it not be important data, or you might not. So the adapter is typically the way you want to go when putting a laptop-sized hard drive into a physical desktop. There we go. Questions so far? No. All right. Moving right along. Solid state drives. The beautiful part of solid state drives, no moving parts. And they utilize non-volatile memory chips, which means what, Amber?
I cannot place the definition.
What is volatile memory?
Volatile is that memory that remains stored after a computer is shut down, or it's ones that's deleted.
Which
Okay.
which one are you picking?
The one, it's memory it's storage that's deleted after the computer is shut down.
Once it loses power, volatile memory loses its data once it stores power. So what would you assume about non-volatile memory?
That it's still stored.
Correct.
After
Absolutely
power
correct. So yeah, non-volatile memory keeps its memory after the power has been turned off. So it is something you would use for long-term storage and does not need a trickle of power to maintain it, kind of like the CMOS RAM.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's less susceptible to physical shock, like we were just talking about in the previous slide. If you have a mechanical hard drive, it's got that platter spinning around really fast. It's got the head that's real close to it, and it's reading the different pieces off of there. If you jostle it and that head comes down and taps that drive, it's going to basically carve a scratch in that drive and damage the plate. If it does it for a long period of time, you can absolutely completely destroy the hard drives. I remember when I was in college, there was a virus that was going around that actually would set the head heights on your hard drive to 0, which means all the heads would just come down and touch the drives as they were spinning, and essentially would destroy physically all of your drives.
Who created that? Who created that nasty bug? He must have been pissed.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it was I can't remember who the actual creator was, but man, it was one of those ones where like basically the whole community came up with ways to fight that particular one. They put fail safes on the drives because it was just something that they'd never thought about. And it essentially was like a nuclear option that you would, that somebody would use in an attack, basically to destroy data.
Oh no, he was pissed. Oh
yeah. So that was a nasty one. But I mean, from that point on, like manufacturers would set so that the drives actually could not be adjusted to those heights. And a lot of fail safes were put in place because it just never really dawned on them at that point in time that you could, over the internet, cause physical damage to somebody else's computer. All right. One of the big benefits of solid state hard drives is faster access time and lower latency. And latency, basically, as we remember, is just response time. The downfall of it, as compared to mechanical hard drives is it is more expensive per gigabit. So $1 of solid state storage is significantly more expensive than $1 of mechanical hard drive storage. So you do gain some benefits, but you also increase your costs. Questions so far with regards to solid state?
Isn't solid state technically the standard now because the HDD is so prone to malfunction, really?
It is moving. The market is absolutely moving in that direction. Plus, we're developing more economies of scale, so the cost of solid state drives is starting to drop at a pretty rapid pace. So yes, the market is absolutely moving in that direction. But even as that's happening, as like, mechanical hard drives are moving away and you start to get the solid state drives are inserting, and then people are starting to move to the even more expensive stuff, which is the M.2 memory chips that, essentially insert directly on the motherboard itself, which are even faster because they have that direct connection versus of having to go through a SATA cable. So, I mean, as one technology is moving out, you still have the solid state starting to become the standard in the industry, and you have another technology starting to move in for the higher end.
And then it's also about need, Jermaine, just like we talked about the tape drive, which we'll talk about more. If you don't need that for your purposes, then you can still use the other options. It's cost versus benefit always, especially on a personal commercial scale. So it just really depends on what your situation is and what you're trying to do. So
yeah. So you may think like on a commercial, like on an individual level, like, hey, I'll spend an extra $20 to get a solid state drive versus a mechanical drive. Makes sense for me. Now, when you're talking about a business and you're going to buy 1,000 hard drives, that $20 adds up really quick. So it's going to be that cost benefit analysis. You've got to make, is this something we really need versus something we could, will still be fully functional for us? And what are we going to be using it for? So, all right. Now, we have 3 types of solid state drives within that family. You have your flash drives, which go by a bunch of different names like thumb drives, jump drives, travel drives, and they have a lot of interchangeable names that they will utilize depending on who you're talking to. None of them are really incorrect. It's just, the terminology that has become useful over time. And these are deemed hot swappable. That is, they are more so now being deemed hot swappable. They were typically considered warm swappable for quite some time, because if you just yanked a USB out of your drive just whenever without initiating that in the actual computer, you could significantly damage the data on the drives, if not the whole drive itself. But now they've updated it quite a bit, and it is technically considered hot swappable at this point. Yes, Ashton.
I'm sorry. Oh,
You were
my mic.
rapidly
Sorry.
coming off, like mute, unmute rapidly. So I didn't know if you were trying to get someone's attention.
No, sorry. I was writing on my laptop.
Got it. Okay. Now they did mention, like right here below where it says USB, FireWire, and SATA are all hot swappable. I tend to have a problem with the mentioning of SATA being hot swappable, because that's kind of like doublethink, if you're familiar with that. That's holding 2 conflicting ideas at the same time. And SATA drives are hot swappable, correct? Is what they're saying. Well, where are the SATAs located? Inside the computer. What's rule number 1 of safety? Do we ever reach inside a computer when the computer's on? So, okay, you're not allowed to reach inside a computer when a computer's on, because that is an important safety feature. Yet there's an internal component inside the computer that is hot swappable. So that always never sat well with me, but technically they consider it a hot swappable drive. Now, if we were using a SATA drive on the outside of the computer, how would it be listed? What would it be called? It was one of the connection points that we had in a computer. They don't just call it SATA. What do they call it?
Can I?
Manuel got it. Well, close. Yeah, SATA. E for external. So when it's outside the computer, it is SATA. Essentially the same technology. They add the E on there to signify that it is an external connection point. All right. The next type of solid state drives we have are compact flash or CF drives. There are two types. We have type 1, which is roughly about 3 millimeters thick, and type 2, CF2, which is a little bit thicker. And they usually go directly into a PC card slot. I don't have one of those to show. I don't know if Marvin has the availability to see on the side of his laptop. You don't typically see these much anymore. But on your side of your laptops, oh, there you go. We can get it visible.
Let me turn it off right quick. The background.
All right, there you go.
My fan is going super high.
Hey, this will be hot.
We all know where I. Here we go.
Yep, there you go.
So this is an older laptop, but it sticks in almost like a credit card, and it places in there.
So they have the CF1, which is the thin one, and then they have the CF2, which is thicker, and usually would take up 2 slots on the side of the drive. All right. Now, the last type that they get into are ones that most of us are going to be familiar with, which are the SD cards, or secure digital. And those are different types of flash memory. Typically, or at the time, the max capacity that they had was 512 gigabytes, which is pretty impressive for such a small drive. And physical sizes they have are the micro SD, mini SD, and XD. And most common use they had for them for a while was cameras. But for those of you who are Android fans, for your phones, they do use them in there as well to be able to expand the memory out. All right, other types. You have the hard drive, SSD, which, as we just talked about a little earlier, they're able to access data much faster than magnetic drives. And there's no wait for the platters to actually spin up. Once the power is initiated on the drives, they can access the data pretty much immediately. They have the form factors that we are pretty much aware of, which is you have the 3.5, which is rare because they typically stay with the 2.5 and then use an adapter to put that into a desktop. And then for the lower end laptops, you have the 1.8. And then now we're starting to see the M.2s, which has essentially its own dedicated slot on the motherboard. And of all of these is your fastest memory and also the most expensive. And max capacity so far, or as of 2015, 16 terabytes. And they typically use SATA, PCIe, or SCSI connectors to connect them to the actual motherboard. SCSIs tend to be pretty rare. They look like old serial ports. All right, and then we have the eMMCs, which is the embedded multimedia controller. It is a little bit slower than your typical solid state, but on the benefit side of that, it's cheaper. It's still faster than a typical mechanical hard drive. So you do gain some benefit there, but you don't have the big step up in cost to go to a solid state drive. Typically used in smartphones and tablets. And they're able to produce these in various shapes and sizes to be able to, mold them into the actual casings, which is another huge benefit for them. And it is embedded into the board of the device and is more common with an SD card than an SSD. Questions so far? All right. Here are some examples of SSDs. You should try to remember these just on sight based on shape, because sometimes they will ask about it. Also, just getting familiar with these particular things. Compact flash, like you see right here. If you used older DSLR cameras, probably about, let's say about 15 years or older, they would use these thicker solid state drives in the actual cameras themselves. Then cameras moved more to the SD cards. And you can go from rather inexpensive on these to really expensive depending on the quality you want out of them and the amount of storage you're going to use either as well. Then they had the mini SDs, SDHCs, the micro SDs should be the one most people are familiar with. If you have the Android phones, that is the typical storage expansion they are using on the phones right now. Use these micro SDs right here and right here. Pro Duo is a technology that was not fully.
It was for Sony. Sony had some digital cameras and they used the Pro Duo stick. It looks like a stick of gum, just off my brief history with selling cameras. But it was proprietary for Sony, and you guys know how that works. If the industry doesn't latch on to your standard, you eventually get replaced with something like what Kelly just said, the SD and the micro XD, which has become the industry standard. So
yes, for digital cameras, HD, camcorders, phones, they're all moving to the micro SD. And the beautiful part is they have nice adapters that will allow you to use micro SDs in an actual SD card for older cameras, or if you have a SD card reader and you don't have a micro SD card reader, it'll allow you to use that too. You will get a lower throughput on your data, but you can still utilize the technology and allow you time to upgrade. If your camera still works, why would you upgrade it when you can just use an adapter for this particular card? All right. Let's see here. Now, here's an example of SD card readers. These are kind of an all-in-one that you would plug into your computer, and it basically would allow you to use almost any kind here. It's basically, to transfer it to a medium so that your computer can actually read it. I have one for my digital camera. It's a little tiny dongle that goes into a USB, and it allows me to do a SD card or a micro SD. But
some computers have them built in. Like an older computer I bought actually had it, because that's when digital cameras were really powerful, and we didn't have the tech for the actual phones to work in that way. They would have it actually built on the tower. On the PC I just picked up, it's also a slot right below it that will take a SD memory stick Pro, which is the Sony one, as well as a XD and an MMC. So it's an older laptop, but that was the thing. Manufacturers knew that they needed to have something available to allow a consumer to pop out their memory card from their camera and plug it into the computer so they can transfer those pictures as quickly as possible, as opposed to using that cable that came along with that purchase. And that, you know, so it was really neat that that was a big thing. But now you can use it if you have an older one. You can use it for your SD card. You know, if you have the adapter, that's still another way to transfer information if your USBs are tied up and you don't want to. You don't have any other way to push it through. You have a dedicated place there. I think that's kind of neat. But now, as Kelly's showing, it's just an external reader that we have as an option now.
Yeah. See, for my camera, I have, it'll allow you to see it.
Yeah, we see it now.
USB dongle, and then it has two little slots in the front for either an SD or a micro SD.
Nice.
So
I already went to the next one for you.
the card readers and whatever are just adapters so that your computer can actually read the drives, essentially. All right. Here's kind of a look at the various examples of SD drives. So you have the fully encased one. It's basically just closed over, but typically it is a series of chips attached to the board, and that's where the memory is stored. They will mold it to fit the space that they have available. This one, I think, hooks up to an IDE. No, is that a SATA? I think it's a SATA.
Let's say them.
Yeah, and then this is a SATA. Here's your M.2 that will go down into an actual, its own dedicated spot into a motherboard. And then you have one right here, which would go into a PCIe or PCI slot for it to be able to read. Questions so far? All right. Hybrid drives. So you have essentially the hybrid, which is the happy medium in between the solid state and the mechanical drives. It typically has both inside one casing. This is a technology that you don't really see that much anymore. It's as people are moving more and more towards just doing the solid state drives. This was something that if you didn't really want to invest fully in the solid state drive, but wanted some increased performance, you could do something like this where they would split the memory and you would have half of it in SSD, and you could use that for the stuff that you're going to be accessing readily and more frequently and need higher reaction times versus the mechanical hard drive where you could store documents and things like that that did not need to be uploaded or read quickly. All right. Question with regards to hybrid, just kind of being the happy medium between mechanical and SSD. All right. Tape drives. These are very old, but still very useful. You can use them internally or externally. Don't typically see them internally very often anymore. They're able to hold huge amounts of data than many other medium types, but they are very, very slow. So they are typically used for like archival storage, anything that you want to store and you do not want that memory degrading over time, and you need to store it for several years. I mean, it could be, 5, 8, 10, 20, 50 years. If you're going to do that, you're typically going to do that on a tape storage device so that you would have a basically solid guaranteed backup. Internal connectors they would typically use would be your SATA, PATA, or SCSI. PATA was the precursor to SATA. And then external drives would typically use USB, FireWire, or eSATA. Like if you're going to back up all the data for your entire company, you would typically do that onto a tape drive if you're going to be using it for long-term storage. You know, so if the system crashes, you need to reclaim a lot of that data. You could go use the tape drives. It's going to take a long time to reclaim that data, but the data integrity will be there. Questions with regards to tape drives? All right. How to connect drives in a PC. Every drive has its own interface, different types of connectors. We've gone over quite a few of them. They can be internal, inside. You can actually use internal drives externally by just having the right connectors. And each interface, each drive will have its own dedicated connectors. Internally, you have the IDE or PATA, which is easily identifiable. It is a very wide ribbon that you would connect. It looks like basically like a ribbon of tape, a tape, and it has, what is it, the 20-pin connectors on either end. You have these SATAs, which have that little L-shaped connectors. And then you have the SCSI drives, or the SCSI connectors, which look almost like an old printer port or serial port. Externally, you can utilize eSATA or external SATA, USBs, FireWires, or Ethernets. Though FireWire, as we know, is kind of falling by the wayside right now. People are more adapting USB. All right. See who can read this one for me. Chris, can you read for us?
IDE, Integrated Drive Electronics, PATA, Parallel Advanced Technology Attachment. Drives send data in parallel on a 40 to 80 wire cable called ribbon. Maximum cable length 18 inches. All PATA drives use a standard Molex power connector. Provide support for speeds up to 133 megabytes per second. 2 IDE drives can be connected to a single ATA controller. Jumpers on the drive make one master and the other slave. ATA 3 introduced self-monitoring and reporting technology, SMART, to track errors and error conditions in the drive. Connects many different drives, including CD-ROM, DVD, zip, and HDD.
Excellent, thank you. And next, they will give you basically a physical look. This is what your typical IDE cables or PATA cables would look like. It's that wide ribbon. You have the broad connector here. And it's just typically a long ribbon internally in the computer, which would connect right here. And I think that the 40 pin and the 80 pin, and then you would have the 4-pin Molex as well. Questions so far with the IDEs? And this is a technology that is on its way out the door because SATA is a much faster medium for transfer, but you will typically, there is a high likelihood you will come across this out in the wild as well.
And it's kind of neat that, like Chris read, it can be used for more than just hard drives. It's not uncommon to see that that IDE cable attaching a optical drive as well, because it will still perform in that capacity. It's not a problem. It was just the medium, like Kelly said, that was being used at the time, and it served a lot of different items or within the PC. But like you said, if you think about it too, look how big that cable is. Look how much landscape or residence is taken up. Like everything's getting smaller. So that cable versus a SATA cable, sure, can cover a lot. So that's why we switched to it. Plus that medium is a much quicker throughput, which is kind of weird if you think about it because it's a cable, but that is the case. And don't get too caught up on the jumpers. They're not going to ask about jumpers. That's for your information. But if you got multiple drives hooked up to one cable, you got to be able to identify who's primary, who's secondary. The conversation is master and slave here, but you know, primary, secondary is just who's going to take, who's number one, who's number two, who's running the show, who's a sidekick. And Mogus can answer, but if you look at the picture of that hard drive to the right of the jumpers is a power supply area. Don't man, you can't answer either. I'm gonna get somebody else. Let's see. I'm pretty sure Steve knows. Steve, what type of power connector goes into that hard drive?
Is that Molex?
Yeah, that's Molex. I just want you guys to get used to it. It's just, it needs to be like a part of your life. That's Molex. Oh, that's Mini. That's fan, like those type of things we want you to get used to seeing or identifying with ease. So, but that's all we need to know on that one. Let's talk about SATA, potato. William, if you don't mind, if you're able to read this one.
Yes, of course. ATA drive. Using serial transmission as opposed to parallel. Creates a point-to-point connection between the SATA device and the SATA controller, the host bus adapter. Connects one device to motherboard. Cannot connect more than one. Cable smaller than the ribbon PATA, PATA cable, 7 wires. Maximum cable length 40 inches, 1 meter. Allows hot swapping. It has 3 revisions: SATA 1, SATA 2, SATA 3. SATA Express, SATA E or SATA 3.2 dives directly into the PCIe. It requires a motherboard with SATA E support.
Thank you, sir. And
Yes.
I think Kelly showed a picture of it, of one of the drives that goes directly into the motherboard. But as you can see, it does require a motherboard that can support it. A little clue: if the motherboard can support it, then I mean it'll have the slot. But there you go. You got to make sure that it has it, because you don't want to put anything else in that PCIe slot. What else? 40 inches, 1 meter. That's enough when you're dealing with that. I think you can work within that distance. Hot swapping, like Kelly just mentioned, is kind of catch-22 because we typically don't hot swap while we have our PC running. That's not something that we would want to do. Anything that's hot swapping, we want to be able to do from the outside, like pulling the a jump drive out the front, like, or the back if it's plugged in the back. You don't typically want to go inside. So that is that. And it's just the new thing. It's what we're using right now. So once you really get comfortable with what the SATA device is, SATA 1, 2, and 3, we'll talk about it just a little bit, not much, but that's the new that's our new method of throughput, and is what's being used on the market right now. Any questions about SATA? All right. A lot of standards here, a lot of information. Go ahead, William.
Yeah, could you just briefly remind me again what is SATA used for, or what was it used before?
Okay, so let's go back to look at this picture right here. One more back. back. I think the picture with the wires is
Oh,
slide
okay.
21. I'm sorry. All right. So you see this hard drive, William? You
Yes.
see, we already know that that's Molex to the right. That's your power. Those jumpers are designed to identify secondary, primary drives. And then you have this big portion cut out on the back there for the connection that's going to allow it to communicate with the PC. That's your IDE cable. It's
Okay.
either 40 wires or 80 wires. So we just talked about that was the thing that they used in the past for connection to the other devices from the motherboard to that hard drive. That's how it's communicated. If I do something and I want to save it, how can I get it to the hard drive? It has to go through that cable. So the SATA cable, which we will see a lot of, replace that wire. It's a shorter, but smaller cable, has a little foot on it, looks like a 7 or an L, depending on how you turn it. But it made that cable become irrelevant because if you're not using that type of drive anymore, if you're using a newer type drives, you'll use a SATA cable versus an IDE cable. So it's just the upgrade in technology in the ways that which we allow communication to happen from your computer, from you, and be saved or brought to that hard drive.
Yes, I figured. That's why I figured I asked, because I've never seen it before, and of course I remember Mr. Kelly just finished saying it's ready. It's no longer going to be in use. No one's no longer going to be using it anymore. But I've never seen it. I have to look more into. Is this something that we're going to be working with maybe in the future as possible, right? Like,
I think Test Out may have a lab that will identify. I know it does with the SATA. I'm not sure about the IDE or PATA cable, but it may. But
trust me, when you open up a computer, when you see it, you'll know it.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
Instead of being a thin wire, it's going to be a fat ribbon.
Oh, I've seen those ribbons before. Yeah, yes, I remember
like
now. Okay.
This right here, that's the wire. Those are the wires.
Yeah.
So it's not just a tiny little ribbon or a tiny little cable. It is a fat, all laid out next to each other, ribbon of wires that will clip in. So it is easily identifiable when you open up a computer.
Wow. Okay. I remember seeing them now. Yes. Okay.
We'll have pictures of the SATA cable coming up, but it's a very good question, William, because we want to make sure that you understand this was the technology of its time. This is how you was transmitting information back and forth from that hard drive using that big cable, and it has now been reduced down to a very, very smaller cable, and it's serving the same purpose and it's doing it better. So it's a win all the way across the board. But we don't stand still. We're constantly evolving. So, but that's I think that answered your question. I'm hoping that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So I pushed back forward to 23. And once again, this is the easiest way to address this particular slide. You got SATA 1, 2, and 3. So for SATA 1, the transfer rate is 1.5. Let's double it. And when we double it, it goes to 3. That's SATA 2. Let's double it again. We go to SATA revision 3, it's 6 gigs. As every revision happened, the ability to transfer information doubled. And that's not by accident. That's by the people who work behind the scenes to advance this technology. They're not going to advance it by a half of 500 megabytes. It has to be a substantial evolution. It has to be enough to make sense of why would we want to push this to industry and make people pay for a change in technology. It needs to be a big enough change that is recognizable and it's worthy of, hey, I need to double my throughput. Let me pay for this change. So that's one thing that I want you to recognize. So SATA 1, 1.5, 2, 3, SATA 3, 6. It doubled each time. That's what this slide is about. That's the take home from this slide. So if I ask someone if you had a SATA with the second revision or revision 2, what's the throughput? If you know what 1 is, you can tell me what 2 is. You can also tell me what 3 is. You can work your way back and forth. Any questions about that? Cool beans. Let's keep it moving. All right, William, where are you? William, look at the back of that. This is the new hard drive right here. 40 pin, 80 pin, gone. Replaced with that cable that you see below, which is red, black, yellow, which may not be, but that's what it is right now. But look at how it looks. Do you see that little foot at the end? It looks like an L or a 7. I don't know how you want to reference it, but it has a little foot at the end of it.
Like,
and so does your input on that device. It will also have a small little foot on the end if Kelly can kind of get close to it. Yeah, it's right there on both of them. Yeah. So you got SATA cable, and you also have SATA power.
Right.
So I want you to not to be confused by that. You have that SATA cable is used for data transmission, but we also, instead of using the Molex that Mogus and Steve mentioned, that 4-pin, we don't have to use that anymore. There's also SATA power right next to SATA cable that looks just like it, but it's smaller with the little foot on it. Do you see both? Do you see that as well?
I was looking at the other screen, but I wasn't looking at what you were using with your mouse. Can you repeat again? I was looking at my other screen where it was showing the Nearpod.
Kelly's working the mouse. So Kelly, kind of bring your hand across that. That's SATA data.
Yeah.
That's for the data cable that we talked about, replacing the IDE PATA, the 4080 ribbon cable. Right next to it.
Makes an L, and then here's the data. Also makes an L.
Right.
Okay. So
you can see it in the connector here where it goes down, and then it has that little foot that makes an L shape. And that's how you'll usually identify SATA cables, is by that L shape.
I sort of see what you guys are saying. I would have to like look at it like a video or something, like to see how they insert it, because I don't know. I don't know how it goes in through there like that.
It just pops in. It won't. It can only go one way.
Yeah, that's why that foot's there, to make sure it only goes one direction.
Right. I see that. So okay.
L shape right here. This one's harder to see, but it's also got an L shape. The L comes down right here.
The ribbon with the little leg looks like a Lego. What is that?
This right here?
Yes.
Well, it has that angled head just to make it easier for connection.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's basically all that is. So instead of jutting straight out like this, it can go in along the side and not stick out too far.
Gotcha.
I swear I had so many of those cables lying around. I don't have any right now. But the smaller one is the data. I misspoke. The larger one is the power. But they both look just alike. It's a size thing that you're working with. But you'll see it once we have a different picture. So the picture with the different colors coming out of it, that's your power, SATA power cable. The red cable, the red one, that's for your data. Okay. The one that you can't see the wires. That's for data.
Okay. And this is what's being used right now in replacing the IDA, right?
Typically,
yes, for the most part, yes. For the big wire cable, that's what's replacing it right now.
Capiche. Got it. Thank you.
All right. SCSI connectors, small computer system interface standards. Like we were saying earlier, it looks very similar to the serial ports you would have on printers. This particular connection type is pretty rare to see in desktop computers. Used to be significantly more popular with hard drives because it allowed for a pretty fast connection. but more often than not now you would see it's on older servers, and they can support up to it's around 7 to 15 devices, and it has better performance than the ATA standards. So, but it is a larger platform, so you would see it more in servers, not personal computers or desktops at this point. And as you can see, it's identifiable, looking very similar to parallel or serial ports for the outside for printers and stuff like that. Questions so far? With regards to SCSIs, you mostly need to be aware of what they are and kind of what they look like. All right. eSATA, essentially the same as the SATA device that we were talking about prior, SATA cables, but it is for external use. So they add the E for external. The actual interface on it is going to be a little different. You can utilize this if you're going to be using internal, if you're going to say plug in a hard drive from another computer into yours, you wouldn't necessarily need to open it up. If you had an eSATA connection on the outside, you can connect it to the drive, and then you're up and running. Makes it a lot easier for quick drive swaps if you need to make it. The cables can be up to about 2 meters or 6 feet long. They have 7 pins, and they run typically about the same speeds as the internal ports. And the shape is a little different, as we were saying. It is not that L shape, but it is still readily identifiable from the outside. You will typically have these somewhere close to your USBs if you do have one, but they're not interchangeable, so it is a little easier to recognize it. Questions on eSATA? Sure. All right, quick identifier. See, DJ, what's number 1?
Is it SSD?
Solid state. All right. Number 2, Carlos.
I'm guessing optical drive.
Optical, very good. And number 3, Kindle. All right. Amber, what's number 3?
I'm not even sure.
Right here.
Can't see what that says. I'm blind.
We're gonna help out.
Oh, HDD.
There you go.
Hard disk drive.
Mechanical hard drive, HDD. All right. This connector here. What is this? Frank.
It's plugged in, but it looks like a SATA.
Very good.
You got to give number 2 to Will.
All right, Will, what's number 2?
Oh, number two is definitely IDA. Yeah, IDA. That big. Am I pronouncing it right? ID was it?
Yeah,
IDE.
Or
IDE.
Yeah, we refer to that one as IDE. We won't give it an actual sound out. We actually set the letters out on that IDE.
IDE. Yes.
Yeah.
That looks like an 80 wire. Like an 80 wire. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably so.
Awesome.
Good job on that, Will.
Thank you.
And right here, what kind of connector is this, Mogus?
SCSI.
Very good. That is a SCSI connector. connector. All right, any questions so far on that? Let's go a little bit more into it here. Chris, what do we got here?
I know it's a 24 pin.
Remember what we've been talking about, Chris.
IDE? No.
There you go. There you go.
ID. Okay.
All right, Jermaine, what's this one here?
And the inflation rate is 5%.
That's the SATA cables.
Very good. Finally. See, Ashton, what do we got here?
The SATA.
SATA. Excellent.
What was number 2 again? I'm sorry.
Number 2 is a PATA cable.
Okay.
ATA.
Okay, thank you.
RAID. Fun subject that A+ loves to talk about. And depending on who you talk to, it is a RAID stands for redundant array of independent disks or a redundant array of inexpensive disks. Those are the 2 different ways you'll heard it stated. It is basically a technology that will combine multiple drives and use them as a single logical unit. The main purpose of it is to increase either performance or redundancy or both. And if a single drive of the RAID array fails, the others, in the manner in which it stores data, for some of them, are able to actually rebuild or recreate that data. And it's used a lot by servers to create extra redundancy for important data. You can also use it, you'll see people use it for personal devices and set them up because it's a way to, increase storage efficiency, speed, and redundancy whenever possible. And the data is distributed across all drives in several different ways, and they're referred to different levels of RAID. The ones you need to be familiar with for the A+ is RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, RAID 0+1, and 1+0. We'll go over each of these real quick. So, see if I can do this real quick. RAID 0. The other way RAID 0 is referred to is striping. You will need a minimum of 2 hard drives in order to do RAID 0. And essentially what it's doing is it's almost like a puzzle. It's breaking down that puzzle like if you have a picture or a document, it's taking each bit and alternately dropping them into each drive. So the first bit would go into drive or disk 0. So that would be A1. The next bit would drop into drive 2, A2. The next bit would go into A3, back on drive 0. A4 would go into disk 1, and it alternates back and forth each bit that it is saving to data. This allows you to essentially double your read and write speed to and from the hard drives. It increases the amount of storage capacity you have available to you, and that is a beautiful thing. However, it has a very big weakness, and that is if a single one of these drives fails, all your data is lost. You have lost everything. It doesn't matter, and this doesn't have to be only 2 drives. You can have a RAID array of 5 drives, 6 drives, and then it would do the same thing. So if you had 5 drives, it would put a bit in disk 1 first, then disk 2, then disk 3, then disk 4, then disk 5. Then it would go all the way back to the first one. Disk 1, disk 2, disk 3, disk 4, disk 5, putting a bit in every single one of them. And it just keeps going down the line. But the problem, again, if you lose drive 3 out of 5, all the information stored in the other 4 drives is now useless because you can't reconstruct it. So that is the major flaw for RAID 0. So, is everybody kind of clear on how RAID 0 works? And it's called disk striping because it's striping the data across all the drives that you have in place. That's another way
Okay,
to
so
refer
if it's not easy to lose your data, what application will we use that for?
Well, I mean, if you're just looking for maximum increased storage, that was the way, it was originally intended, was to be able to increase your storage, increase your reading and writing speed.
Okay.
There you go. Yes, it's for speed upon everything else, Steve. And some people like live on the scary side. But if your speed is your thing, if you needed that increased speed, then this was the option that was available to you. And if I hope all data is important, but if the data wasn't as sensitive or important to you, you can just always pop another drive in. This is for a person who prioritize speed over everything else.
Yeah.
Which
and
now,
cost efficiency, because you're maximizing the amount of storage you can possibly have.
Right.
So then we move, is everybody clear on RAID 0 or disk striping? All right, on to RAID 1. Now, this level of RAID is called mirroring. So, and much like the name suggests, basically every bit that you save in drive 1, you would save it in drive 2 the exact same way. Both drives would essentially be identical. So it is an exact copy from disk 0 to disk 1. Now, you don't increase storage capacity with this. You don't increase, like cost-wise, you're essentially doubling your cost for the same thing, but this does offer you security for your information. So it allows you redundancy. And in this particular case, you have to have a minimum of 2 drives. And then they have to increase, you have to double each time. So instead of 2, you would have 4 next, then 4, you go up to 8. Or, well, actually, you increase it by 2, excuse me. Then you now have the ability, if one of your drives fails, you have an exact copy. So you now have a redundancy, or word is escaping me, a failure rate of 1 drive.
Yeah, fault tolerance of 1.
Fault tolerance. Sorry,
I got you.
I just, for some reason, couldn't remember that off the top of my head. So you have a fault tolerance of 1 drive. So you lose 1 drive, you're still good. Everything is still written on the second drive. You can insert a new drive into that second bay, shut everything down, resync your drives, and it'll create that duplicate for you again, and you're back up to 2 drives. So that's the beauty of RAID 1. Double the cost for the memory, but you have much greater data security. Next, we will have RAID 5 and the return of the dreaded parity bit. All right, as you remember, when we were talking about RAM, what did ECC stand for?
Error correcting code.
Error correcting coding. There you go. And what did it use to correct that code?
Parity.
Parity bit. So now RAID 5 does this exact same thing, utilizing the parity bit to help secure the data, to create data integrity. So what it's going to do is it's going to mark that parity bit across each drive. So it's not going to put all the parity bits on the same drive. It's going to spread it across all drives that you have in place to keep data integrity as the most important thing. So when it's originally writing, you need a minimum for RAID 5, a minimum of 3 drives. So you have the 2 drives for storage and then the other drive for the parity bit. In this example, they're showing 4 drives. So first, when the data is coming in, so the first bit will drop A1. The next bit drops in the next disk A2. The next bit drops in the next disk A3. And then the parity bit gets dropped in the final drive, basically saying these 3 bits are odd or even. The next row, when it comes down, the first bit gets dropped in the first one. Second bit goes in the second disk. And the third bit will actually go in the final disk because the parity bit will be stored in the third disk here. So they're moving that parity bit around. See here, it's in disk 3 here, it's in disk 2 on row B, disk 1 on row C, disk 0 on row D. Now, the beauty part of this is you do get increased speed for storage, for reading and writing to your drives. You get increased speed, which is great. You're increasing your storage pretty good. You don't get as much speed as if you were just doing striping. It's not as fast as that, but it's close. You do get to increase your storage pretty good. And then this particular array, remember, we only need 3 typically to start with. So if you have 3 drives, it will allow you to lose 1 whole drive. And because of that parity bit, the system is able to reconstruct the data of the lost drive. So if the parity bit says this is even and you have an odd number, it knows what bit is missing and it can replace it, much like error correcting coding. If you lose a single bit on error correcting coding, the parity bit will tell you which one is wrong and how do you correct it. So the drive fails, you can pull that drive out, put in another drive, resync your drives, and the software within the RAID array will be able to reconstruct all that data as if the drive had never failed. RAID 5 tends to be the most popular with small businesses and independent users.
Anybody can answer, why do you think RAID 5 is a sought after RAID setup for most parties?
Because if anything happens, you still have a mean of storage where you possibly don't lose your product.
Yeah.
Like that, Jermaine. What were you saying, Amber? Say
it's more security than the other RAIDs.
it gives you that fault tolerance, like Kelly was saying, but it also provides what RAID 0 was giving you too, which was what Steve. Because Steve mentioned it. What do we tell you that RAID 0 give you, Steve?
Speed.
There you go. So you got speed, and then you got the ability to gather that get that information back. Yeah. So that's kind of win-win on all fronts. So everybody was right, Jermaine, Amber, and Steve. So that's exactly why it's sought after.
So question, the RAID system is a setup for means for server systems, or is it like something you do in your tower?
Well, you wouldn't necessarily do it in your tower. I mean, if you have 3 hard drives in your tower, yeah, you could, but typically this would be like an external device.
Yeah.
Okay. Server systems.
But there are people, like I actually have a friend who has a RAID 5 array. For their
put on my glasses.
Wait, I'm sorry, Kendall, I didn't catch that.
That it was missed out. You keep going.
Okay. So You could use it, you know, for personal devices. I mean, I'll pull one up here in a minute and show you what one looks like externally. But you can literally like pop, some of them you can literally pop drives out of them like a toaster, and you just pull one drive out, slap another drive in, resync it, and it'll reconfigure all the drives so that they match up perfectly. So, but yeah, they would use these in server rooms too. And this is for speed and storage. This is about your most economical unit you could put together. You don't have the risk of striping, and it doesn't require the massive amount, like the doubling of the memory costs like in RAID 1 for mirroring. So economically, this is the one most people tend to go for. So questions on RAID 5? Yes, William.
All right, so just to follow up on everything, because I'm really trying to pick up on everything that I got here. This is new information for me. RAID levels. If you lose 3 out of 5, you lose all data for everyone.
Yes.
You're talking about from one row, right? Like this 0.
Okay.
So if you lose C1, you lose everything on that row, right?
Well, here's oh, okay, hold on.
Everything on that disk 0.
Okay.
Trying to follow.
Just to be clear, this is one hard drive.
Okay.
This is a hard drive. So they're calling them disks. So each one of these is its own physical hard drive. And this right here is representing how the data is being written to it. So you have the first bit of data goes on disk 0. The next bit of data, so the next 0 or 1 will go to disk 1. The next 0 or 1 bit will go on disk 3. And then finally, they will use a parity bit to make sure that if this was 0, 1, 0, we would know it's odd. So we'd have to put a 1 here to even it all out. And then on the next drive, they will do the same thing, but they're going to move where the parity bit is from, say, drive 3 to drive 2. Just kind of spread the parity bit out across all the drives. So what happens is if you lose drive disk 0, you lose this drive.
Right.
So all that data is gone.
Yes.
So remember we said this was 0, 1, 0, and this gave us a parity bit of 1 to let us know, hey, this is supposed to be an even number. So we know we have a 0, we have a 1 and a 0 here. So we know this bit is supposed to be a 0. So it reconstructs that. It puts that bit back in there for us. Now we go down here to the next level, which is level B. And suppose this information was supposed to be 1, 0, and 1. And because this is an even number, our parity bit would be a 0 to let us know that it's supposed to be an even number. So we lost that 1 because all we have left is a 1 and a 0. Then it tells us because this was a 0 for an even number, we know that we can reconstruct this data to be a 1. So that data is rebuilt. The same thing happens when we get down to level C. If this is lost, the parity bit right here will tell us, you know, if this is a 0 and a 1, and this is supposed to be odd, we know this is going to be a 0. And then on this last drive, we lose the parity bit. So the parity bit's gone.
Yeah.
But that doesn't matter because we have our data.
Okay.
So if you've lost that whole drive, it can use the other drives to tell you what that lost information was on that drive that went down.
So if you lose information from a C drive, you can pick it up from the B drive, right? Or something like
Well,
that?
if you lose disk 0, you can use 1, 2, and 3 to reconstruct 0.
Like if the whole disk just fails on you and you can't access that one drive, that hard drive has did something weird, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't affect us. It'll slow us down because it'll slow down the process. But between this 1, this 2, and this 3, we can acquire the information lost on this 0.
Okay.
And that's the significance of 5. So you gain that you don't have in some of the other setups. You gain that and you gain some speed. So it's truly a win-win if you need to have that type of setup in your home or your business.
So
Yeah.
the RAID 5 is like he's like the fifth man, but he comes in and fills the gap of whatever was lost in this zero,
Essentially.
something like that.
Essentially.
I like how you're trying to put that in your head. RAID 5 it's pretty much like Emmanuel said, it gives you, we talked about RAID 0 and RAID 1 and the benefits of both. RAID 5 kind of gives you all of that, and it has the probably most ideal setup for commercial use, if I want to put that out there, but also personal use, because like I said, you get the speed, but if you happen to lose one drive, you can acquire the information using the existing drives. So that's a very good place or peace of mind to have when you run into a setup like this.
So one more brief example, and I don't want to take too much of your time. Let's say in a small business, it's actually being used, these RAID 5s.
Okay.
Right now. It's very popular. Give me a primary example, like one of the, I would say maybe at a mom and pop.
We can say, let's say we're in a law office and all of our lawyers are working remotely, and there's a case on there's a case on disk 3 that I'm using, and something happened to disk 3. It just stopped working. I'm gonna call you, William, and say, hey man, I can't pull up anything on disk 3.
Okay.
And you're gonna be like, okay, that's not a problem. Let me do some work. And you're going to use disk 0, 1, and 2 to acquire the information that was lost by disk 3 going down. And you'll be able to give me those case files back.
Okay, so I see you're able to recover the information that was lost. It's very secure. It's very good. I'm just trying to. I think I sort of get it. It keeps making copies after a copy like they keep.
It's dropping breadcrumbs on the other disk pertaining to the disk that it's not. You're exactly right. So 1, 2, and 3 drop all the crumbs from disk 0.
Okay.
0, 1, and 2 would drop all the crumbs from disk 3 collectively. You got to have all 3 of them to create that missing one. So each one has the ability to create the bad one that gets lost by the backups, the small incremental backups that it was making throughout the process. It's like, I got your back. Like, you don't have to hold all the information. Put our 3 heads together, we'll be able to come up with what was lost on the one that's gone.
So it's like a team of 5 then, right? Or a team of 4, but like.
I still say it's a team of 4, but if one person is not as important as any of the others, because if we lose a person, we can get all that information back.
Okay, I get it. It makes a lot more sense now. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
No problem, sir.
But the key takeaways for RAID 3, you need a minimum, absolute minimum of 3 hard drives to make RAID 5 work. So you need 3 hard drives. That's your minimum. And you have a fault tolerance of a single hard drive. And then if you have like 7 drives, for a RAID 5, you have 7 drives dedicated to a RAID 5. You still can only lose 1 hard drive. If you lose 2, all your data is lost because you cannot reconstruct it with, multiple pieces of information missing. It's only a single drive or single bit in that string can be reconstructed using the parity bit, kind of like error correcting code. If two bits came across bad, error correcting code could not fix it. It would have to send the bit data back and have it resent. Yes, Amber.
What would be an example? Like, what's an example of like one drive being lost? Like, if it's damaged somehow, like solely one is damaged.
Well, if it's made by man, eventually it's going to break down.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, a drive is gonna fail. It could be there was an error in manufacturing, like that one just was a bad drive. Sometimes it just doesn't necessarily work out. Then if that mechanical failure happens, then you're able to just kind of pull it out, put in a better drive, and then rebuild everything that, you know, from scratch. Does that make sense?
And it happens because I've purchased Seagate drives and they were bad out of the gate. It could have been through the delivery service or something at the manufacturing or use, wear and tear. Emmanuel mentioned vibration, just wear and tear over time. It just got to a point where it didn't work or it failed a lot prematurely because we will hope that we can get X amount of years, but it's all about use. We don't know how much you're using it. So a number of reasons can cause it to fail. But when that failure happens, we're happy that in this setup, we have the ability to recreate it if that's the only one that failed. And like Kelly tried to make sure we understood, if we increase the amount of drives, we still can only account for one failure. It just makes everybody else having to remember just a little less information. It doesn't have to be as much. It's just a smaller piece because it was more people. But it's still, we're only still able to lose one drive to create the missing drive back. But the big takeaway, and we're trying to, because we want to build on it, RAID 0, speed, fault tolerance, none. Because there's no fault tolerance there. It's stripes. It goes A to B to C to D, back and forth to each drive. RAID 1 is mirroring. Fault tolerance 1 because it makes an exact copy of it.
If you have, if you have 4 drives, your fault tolerance would be 2.
Your 4, yeah, exactly. I'm sorry, Kelly, you're right. It will double with that as you go up. RAID 5.
It's essentially half, yeah. RAID 5.
You get that speed, you get that redundancy through parity slightly, and we only have fault tolerance of 1. We're trying to create that rolling mental Rolodex of what's going on here, because when we go to this next one, it changes just a little bit. So hopefully everybody's good on how those
0, 1, and 5.
0, 1, and 5
is called striping with parity. Is another way that they will identify.
Yeah, striping with parity.
So striping with parity is RAID 5. All right, RAID 10, also known as RAID 1 plus 0, but they'll call it RAID 10 for short. And this is a stripe of mirrors, is how it's typically identified. And it's basically just combining RAID 0 and RAID 1 together. Right. And you will need a minimum of 4 drives to accomplish a RAID 1 plus 0. So if you look, they got it kind of bracketed out for you so that you can easily absorb it. Like right here, just in this bracket, you have mirroring going on. So they're going to put bit 1 here, put the exact same bit over here. Bit 3, bit 3, bit 5, bit 5, bit 7, bit 7. So whatever is written in disk 0 is going to be mirrored over to disk 1, because it's a RAID 1 array in this little bracket. Does that make sense? Same thing going on over here. Exact same thing. So this is also a RAID 1 device. And so they have bit 2 here. They're mirroring bit 2 over here. Bit 4 here, mirroring bit 4 over here. So this is also mirroring. So you have 2 sets of mirrors. But what they're doing is they're striping across the mirrors. So you have bit 1 will drop here, making this overarching RAID 0. So they'll drop bit 1 here, it'll be mirrored here. Then they'll come over here and stripe to the next one. Bit 2 will drop here, and it's mirrored to the next drive. Bit 3 will come down here, it's mirrored to drive 1. Bit 4 will go over to this group and will be mirrored to the next drive. So you essentially have 2 sets of RAID 1s, but they're striping across the 2. Does that make sense?
So it's like just using 50% of the storage. That means
correct. That's what they call it. They call it a stripe of mirrors. So this is one of the more expensive setups you can have because you're trying to get the best of both worlds. Or you're trying to get that speed of striping, but you're having that extreme redundancy in data. So we have a minimum of 4 drives needed to set this up. And it has a fault tolerance of up to 2 drives.
And please, somebody tell me why. Based off what Kelly just showed us, why do we have a fault tolerance of 2 drives?
Because it's
look at it, Ashton. Point it out. If I lose disk 1, how can I recover it?
Well, it mirror
because of what?
Parity.
Because of disk 0, because it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And if I lose disk 3, how can I recover disk 3, Jermaine?
You can recover disk 3 by the mirror effect it has from disk 2.
That's it. So I can literally lose 1 and 3 and still have all my information because all of it's there from disk 0 and disk 2.
But if you lost 2 and 3,
you're in trouble.
You're in trouble.
Yeah. So you don't want that's the issue. That's the issue with the known issue with RAID 10 on 1+0. So exactly.
So does RAID 1 plus 0 make sense? So it's basically.
So if you lose,
do what?
Sorry, I had a question. If you lose 2 of the same mirrors, you're out of luck.
Yeah. So if I lost disk 0 and 1, all data is gone. If I lost disk 0 and 2, all good. If I lost 0 and 3, all good. Or 1 and 2, or 1 and 3. I just can't lose both disks in that RAID 1 setup. So, and why, this is like a setup you would put together if you really, really value data integrity. You just don't want to take the risk of losing more than 1 drive like you would in a RAID 5. So this would be the setup you would move to after that because you have the full mirroring and you can lose a few more drives without losing all your data. All right. Any questions for RAID 1+0? All right. Finally, we get to RAID 0+1, which essentially is just the reverse of what we just talked about. So in the bracketing, you would have, and this one is called a mirror of stripes. So you would do your striping in each RAID 0 silo. So you have disk 1, disk 2. So you have bit 1, bit 2, bit 3, bit 4, bit 5, bit 6, bit 7, bit 8. And then the RAID 1 array would mirror that whole scenario over to here. So you have bit 1, bit 2, bit 3, bit 4, and so on. So it's basically the same thing as a RAID 1+0, just flipped. There are other RAID options out there, like one that's taking up more popularity, exceeding popularity over RAID 5 now is RAID 6, which is, it uses 2 parity bits. So it allows for a fault tolerance of 2 disks rather than just 1. And that's starting to gain in popularity. And it can actually use more drives than a RAID 5 can. But that actually will not come up on the A+. It's just something you may come across out in an enterprise environment. Excellent. So basically, these slides are kind of just reiterating what we had just gone over for RAID 0, 1, where it's stripes without fault tolerance. You're getting the redundancy here with mirroring, need at least 2 drives. RAID 5, distributing the data evenly, utilizing the parity bit across each drive so that it can be reconstructed if a single drive fails. RAID 1+0 and 0+1, being a stripe of mirrors or a mirror of stripes, basically combining both RAID 0 and RAID 1 together to try to gain the benefits of both. And here's a quick little diagram that kind of gives you the just a good breakdown on what are the minimum number of drives required to make that initial setup, and the fault tolerance, or how many drives can fail before all data is unusable. So you have the 0 where you have a minimum of 2, 0 fault tolerance because you're basically just going for maximum speed, read-write ability. RAID 1, 2 drives, you can lose 1. RAID 5, minimum of 3, you can lose 1. And even if you go up to 5 drives, you can still only lose 1. 0+1 and 1+0, both of those you have a minimum of 4 drives, and you can lose up to 2 drives so long as you don't lose the same drives in the mirrors. Any questions with regards to RAID? We will drop a video by PowerCert in the Slack channel. Kind of goes over it pretty good. He uses pretty good visuals and breaks it down a bit for you, so it's a little bit easier to absorb. So now that you have the basic understanding of it, the video will make a lot more sense, probably help you wrap your head around it a little better. But we'll drop that in Slack here in a little bit. All right. Hardware versus software RAID. Let's see. Will, can you please read for us?
Yes. Hardware versus software RAID. Hardware RAID centers on a controller that handles all RAID functions. This controller has chips with their own processor, memory, BIOS, and ROM with their configuration. It allows hot swapping. It is used when performance is a priority since it provides speed along with data redundancy. Software RAID means the OS is in charge of all RAID functions. It works for small RAID solutions, but tends to overwork the OS. Windows servers has a disk management program that allows to configure RAID 0, 1, or 5. And it works with SATA and PATA. Is it PATA? I forgot. PATA. Windows 7.8 disk management can do RAID 0 and 1. Windows 0.1-10 can do RAID 1 and 5. It is used when price takes priority over performance.
So basically what they're talking about is they have external RAID devices, like it is basically a full in-case device, and it would have a chip controller inside that device, external from your computer, and that would handle most of the functions of the RAID with regards to data distribution and reconstruction if needed, and allows for hot swappable drives. And then software RAID is, you're essentially linking the drives yourself, and you're using the operating system on your computer rather than an external chip controller in a RAID device to actually manage all of that stuff yourself. You can do it, but again, it's extremely taxing on the operating system itself. And you can go back as far as Windows 7 in order to set up RAID arrays within your actual computers. I think 7 and 8 is only 0 and 1, and then you can go up to 5 with Windows 8.1 to 8.10. Questions with regards to that? The main takeaway for hardware versus software. Hardware, everything is external. It's its own independent device, and the data distribution and computations are taking place in that device. Software, you're trying to control it from your operating system, and it's going to cause a greater strain. All right. Factors to consider when purchasing a hard drive. Frank, can you please read?
Gotcha. Capacities of the hard drive. The more gigabytes or terabytes, the higher the price. Magnetic drives have larger capacity for the money than solid state drives. spindle speed. The most common is 7,200 RPM. The higher the RPMs, the faster the magnetic drive. Interface standards. Use the standards your motherboard supports. For SATA, most likely that will be SATA 2 or SATA 3. For external drives, common standards are eSATA, FireWire 800 or 400, and SuperSpeed or high-speed USB. Cache or buffer size. For magnetic hard drives, buffer memory improves performance and can range in size from 2 megabytes to 128 megabytes.
Excellent, thank you. And as for the interface standard, as we know, back when this was written, FireWire 800 and 400 was pretty commonly in use, but it is rapidly going out of popularity in favor of the USB-Cs and USB 3.0s.
Kelly, I want to do, anybody know about the transmission speeds of SATA interface? I wonder if I pick on somebody, they'll be able to give me the answer. Oh, Amber, you don't, you shaking your head. Remember what? Let's see. Jermaine, we just went over it. I told you just double it. You remember we just got to double it? So if I tell you.
I'll give you a hint. I'll give you the first one. Was it SATA 1?
Yep, SATA 1. Hold on, Ashton say he's ready.
Oh, Ashton's got it.
No hints needed. Go ahead, Ashton. Give me the transmission SATA 1, sir.
SATA 1 is 1.5.
Oh, so now Amber can give me 2. Amber, can you give me 2? SATA 2?
3.
There you go.
Jermaine, give me 3. You shook your head. What's SATA 3?
6.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. Thanks for all that played. Thank you, Ashton. Got to stay on your toes.
All right. Steps to install a drive. You know, I'm going to ask, what's step 1?
Looks like
Power down and unplug.
And?
Drain capacitors.
By?
Pressing the soft power button on the front or top.
There we go. Excellent. Next, you're going to decide which bay is going to hold the drive, examine the locations, length of the cables, all that fun stuff. Make sure you have the capability to do that. Stationary bay, they typically will have covers over these particular drives. You'll want to remove usually 1 or 2 screws. You can pull one out. Now, if you're putting these together and you lose one of those bay drive, the bay drive covers, is that, it's okay just to kind of, if they're not really doing anything, they're just kind of there. What purpose do they serve?
To prevent dust.
Okay, that's one.
That's one.
There's another big one.
Airflow.
There you go. If the bays are uncovered, the fans won't be able to work as efficiently to manage airflow within the actual computer. It seems like, if you open it up, it's got a lot more air moving through it and it's going to work much better that way. That actually is incorrect. You want the air to, flow in a particular way through the computer for maximum efficiency in getting the heat removed from the unit.
Excuse me, what was the first reason before airflow?
Dust and debris.
Okay, thank you.
So especially if you have pets. Cats are notorious for this because they love finding those like nice little warm nooks to kind of hang out in. So they'll climb behind a computer. And I actually had a friend who opened up a computer because the computer was rapidly overheating and it looked like a pillow. It was absolutely and utterly jam-packed with cat hair. And I mean, just every crevice, it was like crammed in there. It was getting sucked in through the vent and not going out the back. And it was just massively full and it was unable to function. It was overheating really quickly and not able to disperse that heat just because of all the debris that got into the computer. All right. Decide which SATA ID connectors on the board to use. and connect the 15-pin SATA or the 4-pin Molex power connectors, supply power to the drive, and then you make sure to double check all of your connections, make sure everything's sitting snugly, firmly in place before you put everything back together, power up the system, and verify that your BIOS can see the drives. Questions about that? All right. Here's a visual look at what the drive bays kind of look like. Right here, this is both of these are actually pretty large towers, and they would just slide in, and then there's that metal tab that you would need to remove before inserting the drive, and would allow you to actually put it in place. And then some of them are clipped in, some are screwed in. The clipped in ones tend to be aggravating because multiple ones will fall off at the same time, and you have to make sure all of the bays that do not have drives in it have those bay covers in place so that you have proper airflow. Troubleshooting hard drives. Slow performance. Problems during boot. Let's see here. Slow performance results typically occurs when the drive is overly full, writing and reading from the drives that the data is scattered all over the place, because typically when drives, especially magnetics, you don't have to worry about this with solid state hard drives. When you're writing to the drives, at first it's writing in sequential order, and then you delete something and then it writes over that. Well, if whatever you're writing over that with is larger than what you deleted, that information is now going to be in two separate places. So over time, you can see as you keep reading, you're writing and deleting information from these drives, the data that you're writing to the drives becomes more and more fractured and scattered across the entire hard drive. And as that happens, it becomes harder and harder for the computer to pull all that data together in order to be able to give it to you, because all the data is not in one sequential place, it's scattered all across the drives. So in order to correct an issue like this on mechanical drives only, you would use a defragmentation tool. You will need at least, I think, 25% of your drive available to effectively defragment the hard drive. So what's going to happen is the computer is going to basically erase and rewrite all the information on your hard drives, putting all the data that is similar or all the stuff that goes together lumped together in one spot, so that the hard drive can actually now read that information at a much faster rate. And then it leaves a wide open space on the end so that when the drive's putting new information on that drive, it will also be clumped together. Typically, this is general maintenance that you're going to want to do on mechanical hard drives. Do it once every month, couple weeks, depending on the frequency to which you read and write from your hard drives. All right, problems during boot. If BIOS can't find the hard drive at post, it will display an error message. What does an error message for post look like or sound like? What is it? How do we know we got a post error?
Beeps.
Beeps. How do we know what that error is?
Look at the manual.
Manufacturer.
All right, if I lost the manual, what do I do?
Google it.
Google it. There you go. So some of the solutions you can do, if it doesn't recognize it, remove and reattach drive cables, inspect for damage, such as bent pins when you pull the pins out, because sometimes if you're not careful putting it in, those pins are pretty fragile. You could, inadvertently bend a pin. Determine if the drive is actually spinning by itself. Check to see if cables are frayed or any other damage to the cables. Like if, hopefully not, you have cables running across the floor, you're running your chair across these cables on a regular basis. If they're going to external drives or network cables or anything like that, each time you cross over it, you're damaging those cables a little bit, and over time they will cease to function. Check the UEFI or BIOS for setup errors to make sure the drive was properly configured and the computer can actually see it in the drive. And then, if at all possible, you try booting from another bootable media like your optical drive or USB or something along those lines. All right. After all of this, you should be able to describe the purposes, types, and characteristics of storage devices, compare and contrast various connection interfaces for drives and their characteristics, explain the purposes and types of RAID, and have an idea as to when you would want to implement each one depending on your company's needs. And then describe the process of installing a storage device and identify common issues and describe quickly how to solve them. Are there any questions with regards to drives? All right, so we can stop the recording there.